Hello viewers, I am Joseph Adumako, your integrated science teacher. I'm here on senior teleclass on Tech TV. I'm here to take you through integrated science SHS 3. This is our first lesson, lesson 1, and our topic for today is crop production. Crop production, which is a very important topic in our syllabus. And as I said, it is for Form 3 students. However, all SH2 students as well as SHS1 students can equally benefit. And I hope if you are there in your home, you can participate in this lesson. Now, let's look at our lesson objectives. At the end of this lesson, the student will be able to, 1, explain the term crop plant as applied in crop production. Identify at least 3 ways of classifying crops. State at least 4 uses of crops. Introduction. What is a crop? The term crop refers to plants that are deliberately cultivated and gathered for human and animal use. Any crop that is deliberately cultivated and gathered for human and animal use is referred to as a crop, which means that if a plant is growing somewhere, though it might be a plant that can be consumed, but if I am clearing my field for cultivation of another crop I will want to cultivate, that particular crop there or that particular plant there becomes a weed. So if I deliberately cultivate grasses in order to use it to feed my animals, those grasses become a crop. Crop plants which are in continuous demand within a community are referred to as a staple crop or staple crops. For example, if you go to the Ashanti region, the most cultivated or the most demanded crop is cassava, because cassava is needed in the preparation of fufu, which is the most delicacy for the people of Ashanti region. So cassava and plantain become staple crops within the Ashanti region. And if you go to the northern region, you are likely to use sorghum and other staple crops to prepare various dishes. Now let's look at how we will classify crops. Crop plants may be classified into groups based upon their uses. Botany, life cycle, climate, and method of cultivation. We will take each of these and discuss it into detail, but our major concern will be for their uses and then the life cycle. Classification of crops based on their uses. Cereals. When you talk of a cereal crop, we are talking about grasses which are grown for their edible grain. So a cereal crop is a crop that belongs to the grass family, which produces an edible grain. At this point, I would like you to give me some examples of cereal crops. I know by this time, the first one that might have come to mind is rice. The next might be maize, millet, sorghum, etc., etc. These crops belong to the grass family and produce edible grains. So as you can see from the diagram, we have various cereals. We have barley, corn, wheat, millet, rye, and so on. Legumes. Legumes, these are crops that produce grains which have high protein content and have the ability to fix nitrogen into the soil. They are crops that have high protein content and have the ability to fix nitrogen in the soil. Earlier on in our lesson on nitrogen cycle, we have already discussed the presence of rhizobium in the root nodules of leguminous plants that fix nitrogen into the soil for crops. So when you talk of leguminous crops, the examples that come to mind include cowpea, groundnut, soya bean, bambara bean, and all the other species of the bean family. So as you can see from the diagram, beans, and the next one, bambara beans. These are good examples of grain legumes. The next class of crop is the roots and tubers. These have modified stems which grow underground. Example, cassava, yam, potato, etc. They are crops which have modified stems. Their modified stems grow underground and serve as storage organs. And this is what we harvest and consume, the carbohydrate they provide. So as you can see, potato, yam, and cassava are good examples of this class of crops. Our next class of crops are edible fruits and nuts. Edible fruits and nuts are crop plants that produce fruits which are edible, and others also produce nuts. In terms of nuts, a good example is the cashew nuts. In terms of fruits, pineapple and pawpaw quickly comes to mind. And as you can see from the diagram, we have a number of fruits and nuts provided as examples for us. You can see banana, mango, apple, coconut, watermelon, pineapple, and so on and so forth. They belong to the class known as edible fruits and nuts. Our next class of crops are referred to as beverage crops. These are crops that contain stimulants and are used for the production of non-alcoholic beverages. Examples include cocoa, coffee, and tea. So coffee, some of you perhaps might not have seen coffee before, but this is a picture of the coffee fruits at its maturity stage being harvested. Upon harvesting and drying, the color, however, will change to something dark. Cocoa, which I know most of you may be familiar with. and then tea. Fortunately for us, in Ghana, every beverage crop is referred to as tea. But in this lesson, I want you to know that we have the tea plant. So we have a special beverage called tea. The next class of crops are oil crops. These are crops whose fruits produce edible oil. Examples include coconut, groundnuts, oil palm, sesame, soya bean, and you can add more to the list. So this is peanuts. This is oil palm. And this is sesame, the sesame seed. Most of you might have enjoyed some on top of your burger as you buy them from your various grocery shops. We also have sunflower. Sunflower oil is one of the good oils that we can consume. Then our next class of crops are fiber crops. These are crops whose leaves, fruits, and stem produce fiber. Examples include cotton, sisal, quinoa. As you can see from the diagram, sisal crop can be used to produce the rope which is nearby the crop. And we have the jute plant, which can also be used for producing jute sacks, the sack which is commonly used for packaging cocoa. And as you can see, our cotton has also been processed into yarns for sewing. So these fiber crops produce fiber which can be processed into various industrial products. Our next class is the most common one that we all are familiar with, vegetables. The term vegetable refers to crops that are cultivated for their leaves, stems, fruits, and roots, which are eaten alongside the main food. Examples include onion, pepper, tomato, garden eggs, etc. As you can see from the diagram, we have the eggplant, which in some cases is also referred to as the aubergine. We have carrots. We also have cucumber together with tomato in a basket. These are all vegetables. Our next class of crop is forage crops. Forage crops refer to grasses and legumes that are cultivated and eaten by livestock. Examples include elephant grass. The second one is my elephant grass. The first one is the guinea grass. We also have a forage legume we call centrosema. These can be cultivated and used to feed farm animals, and therefore are classified as forage crops. We then go to industrial crops. As the name implies, they are used as industrial raw materials. Example, sugarcane. We have tobacco. We also have cotton. These crops produce raw materials that can be processed into various products for human use. Our next class is ornamental crops, which I know most of you might not consider as crops, but they are indeed crops because we deliberately cultivate them. So these ornamental crops are crops which are cultivated purposely for their aesthetic value. What I mean by aesthetic value is that we plant them for beautification purposes. Examples include sunflower, roses, etc. In our diagram, we have petunia flower. I don't know how many of you have seen some before, or some of you may have some in your houses. We have daffodils flower. We have bamboo. I know a number of you will not consider it as an ornamental plant, but indeed it is an ornamental plant. Where we have tulip. We have the allium bulb. And then we have our most common and favorite flower, the rose plant. These plants or crops are grown purposely for beautification and therefore are referred to as ornamental crops. So with that, we'll come to the end of our first classification, that is classifying crops based upon their uses. We now go to the next level of classification based on life cycle of crops. Based upon the life cycle of crops, crops can be classified either as annual or arable crops. Crops that grow, reproduce, and die within 1 year or one growing season are referred to as annual crops or arable crops. Examples include maize, pepper, tomato, wheat, watermelon, etc. These crops grow, reproduce, or complete their life cycle within one growing season. So which means when we plant them within some few months, their life cycle comes to an end and we harvest them. Then we have the second class based upon life cycle, referred to as biennial crops. These are crops that grow, reproduce, and die within 2 years or 2 growing seasons. And here we have examples such as carrots, parsley, and onions. Then we have those that we classify as perennial crops. They are crops that grow and last for 3 to 5 years. Here I would like to pause and ask for some common examples. I know you are likely to have come up with examples like ginger, avocado, blackberry, which is not common in our parts, and then apple. But at least ginger is a very common example for us. Then we have those that we refer to as permanent crops. And as the name goes, you can predict how long they will remain or how long it will take for them to complete their life cycle. These crops usually will complete their life cycle within 10 to 30 years. So here we are talking about the plantation crops like cocoa and rubber. Students, we will proceed with uses of crops. Having looked at the classification of crops based upon their uses and life cycle, it is time to consider how these crops are utilized in our daily lives. I know the first thing that comes to mind is food. Crops are the source of food. As humans, we are unable to produce our own food. The fact is, we do not have the necessary ingredients that is needed for the manufacture of food. The only living organism within our planet Earth that is capable of providing or producing its own food are plants, which contain chlorophyll and have the ability to absorb sunlight energy and combine with carbon dioxide in a process called photosynthesis to produce their own food. So food is the first use or the most common use of crop plants. Crop plants that produce food for human consumption are referred to as food crops. Some also serve as animal feed. Remember earlier on we mentioned forage crops. Animal feed is largely vegetative in nature and consists of forage legumes like centrosema and grasses such as guinea grass. We also use some crops, as we mentioned earlier, such as the industrial ones, as raw materials for making clothing. So fiber crops such as cotton is used in making clothing. And as we saw earlier, we realized that cotton can be processed into yarns, which can then be processed into materials and even yarns for making dresses. Some crops are also used as drugs. In our part of the world, especially in Ghana, we have a lot of herbal medicine which are produced from crops. Certain parts of crops, such as the stems, roots, and even fruits of different plants, are used intensively in curing several diseases. Shelter. We may also use the leaves of grasses and the leaves of plants such as oil palm as important materials in roofing our thatched houses. Again, crops are also used as ornamentals, and as mentioned earlier, by virtue of their decorative appeal and their sweet scent, these plants provide human residential areas with pleasant scenery, and therefore we deliberately cultivate them. Crops may also be used as raw materials, as we discussed earlier. Some crops are cultivated at the plantation level and used to feed agro-industries for manufacturing many useful products. For example, cocoa is used in the manufacture of chocolates, Milo, and so many other important products. Sugarcane may be processed into sugar, and many other, the molasses is even utilized in making biogas. In summary, we have discussed the term crop, and we said that crop refers to plants that are deliberately cultivated and gathered for human and animal use. We also mentioned the fact that crops can be classified based on uses, botany, life cycle, climatic conditions, method of cultivation. We also, in this lesson, have studied or mentioned some of the uses of crops, which include shelter, animal feed, clothing, drugs, raw materials, and ornamentals. For our first exercise, and as an introductory exercise, I've tried to make it as simple as possible so that every one of us will be able to secure all the marks, and to encourage us to continue to watch and learn every other time. So our first question is, explain the term crop plants and give 5 examples of crop plants. You are to explain the term crop plant and give 5 examples of crop plants. I will be glad if you will not open into any book and try to write your answer from memory. Your second question is to identify 3 ways of classifying crops. Identify 3 ways of classifying crops. And your last question is to state 4 uses of crops. You are to state 4 uses of crops. Please do your best to do this. Try these questions from memory and do not make any attempt to look into any textbook. This will help me to be able to evaluate your level of understanding and be able to assist you understand things better in our next lesson. Thank you, and continue to watch Senior Teleclass on Tech TV now and every other time. Stay blessed and safe.